Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Nature of Natural, the equestrian themed podcast that features all of the philosophy of equitation science with the team from the Nature of Natural. And I'm so excited. I've been waiting for this call for a while now because we're going to sit down with Ginny Elder, who is one of the key people on the team. Tim McGaffick is going to join us a little bit later in the call, but for the beginning part, we're going to talk a little bit about Ginny's background. So welcome to the podcast, Ginny.
Thank you. It's so nice to see you. I did
It's good to
cite
see
you
you.
briefly here in Ocala, but you were busy lady.
Yes, Ibiricon. We just all finished. I saw Tim from across a room and waved, and then we
That
never
was about
saw
all
each
there
other.
was time for.
Yeah, that was it. What a fun time that was, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially, I really enjoyed the educational part of that. I thought that was a great adjunct to the spectacular festivities and everything.
Right. And what a beautiful place. World
Yeah.
Equestrian Center is a phenomenal spot. How close are you guys to the Equestrian Center?
Tim's place is about, I would say, less than 10 minutes. I'm about 20 minutes away where my horses are.
Yeah.
But it's such a beautiful drive, spectacular scenery here in Ocala. It's unreal to me.
Jenny, I'm so excited to learn a little bit more about your background. You know, it's funny, when Tim first mentioned you to me, he had been telling me all about Tom Dorrance. I was hearing all these Western names. And so he brought you up, and all of a sudden, Charles DeComfy comes into the mix. And, I'm thinking, what is this dressage girl doing with all these guys? But then as I learned more about both you and Tim, I realized that it's a bigger picture than I first had in my mind. So I'd love to hear more about your background.
Well, it is a bigger picture, and we'll just try and be like a stone skipping across the pond. Not a lot of details, but just a few headlines in there. So, I literally hit the earth with this obsession for horses, as my mother and grandmother would attest to, like so many, I think, young girls did. Don't worry, she'll outgrow it. This is my grandmother's advice to my mom, who was crying, by the way, because my room is plastered with horse stuff. But I didn't outgrow it. It became more evident that this was my purpose, this was my path. So my whole life, from the time I was little, was just consumed with horses. My dad was in the military. I did not grow up with a silver spoon in my mouth or with horses. Every base we went to, I found horses, though. And so my whole focus was, for my education, my college, was horses. And I went to work, I lived in Hawaii and worked on a cattle ranch every weekend on the island of Oahu. Then I got a job in Colorado on a guest ranch, and that really, defined my opportunity. I eventually married the Dick Elder, who started the ranch, but I oversaw 120 horses for about 37, 38 years. And when I went to work, I was just 17, a children's counselor, but I was passionate about the horses. So I ended up becoming the head wrangler. Uh, and that was almost unheard of in those days for a female, first of all, to be even a trail guide, let alone the head wrangler. And I had 10 cowboys who worked for me, who threw every roadblock up imaginable to get me to stumble and fall. But the only saving grace was I really could outride them all. Not that I was that great, but I loved them so much, and I always got along really good with horses. So horses that might have thrown them some problems, they were easier for me. So anyway, that I did everything Western you can imagine in Hawaii, from roping to barrel racing to all that. But then I met a lady from England who said, "Oh, do you come over for jumping lessons?" So I did, and I was gone. I was like, because I was a real Yahoo Harry in those days. You had to be to put up with those cowboys and, you know, bandage those horses and everything. But I love that jumping. And then so she was into hunter jumpers, and I had never heard of 3-day eventing, but hunters and jumpers were way too boring and staid for me and way too political. So I hear about 3-day eventing, and off I go. I buy an advanced level 3-day horse that was shortlisted for the '87 Olympics.
Wow.
Up for a clinic with Jimmy Wofford and never looked back. It was quite an exciting time. But this horse that I bought, his name was Cobblestone, and he had been trained up to Grand Prix in his dressage portion of 3-day eventing. And so I signed up with this guy named Charles Tecumseh. Never, he was coming into the Four Corners area, and he was the defining moment in my life. As far as who I became as an equestrian, as a teacher, and as, I hope, a well-rounded human being, because he was always very firm about that equestrians need to be well educated in many, many topics and not become boring and just talk
Mhm.
horses all the time. So he became my coach, my mentor, and a very close friend of mine. And in the meantime, I rode with Arthur Cotis. I had Garrett Heuschman as a friend. Arthur's a friend too. So I had this opportunity to go internationally around the world, meet these guys, study with them. For me, after the 3-day eventing, I lost Cobblestone rather suddenly. I turned into the educational part of this. That is really where my passion has always lied. At Colorado Trails in the early '80s, I founded a school with American Humane Association and was
Mm.
the first school in the country on horse abuse and cruelty and investigations. And we ran that school for 15 years at the ranch, brought in animal control officers from all over the country to teach them what the basics were so that they could go out and help horses. So, I'm kind of juggling this, like, I just love learning from these guys. Arthur and his Charles especially was defined me as an instructor. He was masterful teacher. And I sat and watched him for at least 1,000 hours and learned how he was. My guest ranching experience, though, we had 80 guests a week, 120 horses, and we ran for May through September. That's a lot of riding lessons that I taught. So that saying, who's the best one to teach you how to ride is the horse. That is true. And I taught so many riding lessons. The numbers, if you do the math, it's just like, oh my God, But it gave me a different, a perspective, towards teaching and horses and people. And because I was so passionate about trying to better the lives of horses, I realized early on I had to work with people to help horses. Horses are easy to me. I love them. They never give me any problems. They're like the blessed part of my life. But the people can be somewhat problematic. But in order to really help horses, you've really got to help people. And, years later now it comes back around to the equitation science, where all those principles that they have is just like a strong foundation for whatever discipline, whatever breed, whatever you want to do. It's a strong ethical foundation of behavioral science. This is what makes them tick. This works, this doesn't work. Take this information, hone it to your own discipline. So it's really, quite intriguing to me. Tim and I have been doing this for well over 20 years now. We used to do the most amazing writing clinics and hand-eye coordination and all kind of cool things like that. We've worked on a couple interesting projects. One was heart rates and emotionality, and when we were doing it was a very, simple, the high tech stuff wasn't there, but we developed some videotapes on that, which is pretty doggone interesting. And meeting Tim, I saw him work at a clinic and he's a hand, there's no doubt, and also horses really like him, all animals really like him, And then I don't know, he came to me and he said, "Can I take a lesson? I'd like to learn about more about this shoulder in business." So he came and took a lesson, and then, we our paths just kind of kept crossing, and then he went off to Hawaii, but when he came back is when we really started in 2008, really starting to put clinics on and work with people and do a lot of videotaping of what he was doing and how he was doing it. Um, so, it's been interesting. I give my credit for wherever I am in this horse world, though, to those horses at Colorado Trails Ranch. I built that herd, I bought the horses, I trained them. Once they came to us, they were never sold. They worked
Mm.
hard for us, they lived their lives out with us. But it was an experience that is pretty extraordinary. Someday, I hope to write a book called Raised by the Herd, because you have to understand, you turn loose a 17, 18-year-old girl with 120 horses left to her own devices, and you got to get this done and this done and this done. And I'm out there just having the time of my life doing it.
Yeah.
And that's way before Charles or Arthur Codis or fancy horses or anything. I just love them. And what's interesting now in hindsight, the things that I've learned through Charles, through equitation science about animal behavior in a more formal setting, those horses taught me live time in the world. It's an interesting feeling when you're that daily, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, month, year after year after year, how there's an exchange of energy, I guess, and acknowledgement and teaching. And those horses are the ones who taught me all this. What
Oh,
wasn't that I like, had it all going in, but it was those experiences. And so most people, they ride, if they're lucky, maybe half a dozen horses in their lifetime. Most people, one or two. So
mhm.
there's a big difference in the management part of it, the stockmanship part of taking care of that many horses. So it's a weird deal. I just, I can get around horses, and I don't mean to say, "Oh my gosh, that horse is lame," but it just is a computer printout. I'm not consciously looking for that, but I see things like
See
that,
it.
or a saddle that's not quite, or, "Oh my gosh, you're kinda sitting whopper-jawed in the saddle there, maybe we could get you," and maybe your horse would stop going
Straighten
around
up.
in circles that way, so it was a real wonderful, l life that I had, and it was a real gift, from those animals. We talk about how this transition from being a Yahoo cowgirl, which I was, I admit it, to, dressage. I don't admit that too much anymore, however, in view of the politics. I just love horses, love to learn, love to teach, and I like to keep learning about stuff in the horse world. And this is where I think a lot of horse people get stuck. And there's just a human tendency to, what you know, and when I'm not giving it up, and I don't suggest anything new to me, but this equitation science and some of the studies and the new research are very validating for the old classical masters. It's just and that's why, with, John St. Ryan and Tim and I, with the Tom Doris connection, it's it was a real epiphany to see he grew up out on the ranch, and he learned all those same principles. We didn't know they were principles. I just
Mm.
certainly didn't know when my horses were teaching me, but they were, and so I just really encourage people to, open your mind and go see what's going on. And it's all about education, education, education. And yeah, it's been great. But I tell you what, at the ranch, it was, interesting when I got that 3-day eventing horse. I would get up at 4:30 in the morning, get down to the barn because we turned all the horses out on a 500 acre mountain ranch. And
Oh, wow.
we had, and this is something else, how wild horses, they all have their little family units. Same thing with my 120 horses. They all have their little family units, and somebody in that family unit, usually the Dennis the Menace of the group, got a bell put on him, and we'd turn him out into the mountains, and I'd go down to the barn at 4:30, saddle my horse up, and I'd go wrangle those horses, and I'd listen for bells and drive them down the road, and they caught on, they know food's waiting for us at the barn, so it was a lot of fun doing that, and then I get this 3-day eventing horse, and I think, I need to practice riding in these English saddles because I wasn't, I'm again doing this by the seat of my pants until I met Jimmy Wofford.
Yeah.
So I started riding with my English saddle on my wrangling horse, not my 3-day horse, but my wrangling
Uh-huh.
horse. And those cowboys couldn't stand it. They mocked me and made fun of me, but it was great practice, going down and up and over the mountains in that flat saddle. So
Yeah.
then I got a set of jumps delivered to the ranch, and no one was safe in the off season because I'd put those jumps all over the ranch. You go cannon around a corner, and there might be an ox
Yeah.
on the trail in front of you, but the laughing continued, and so one day I saddled up Cobblestone and I asked my head wrangler, now I'm the barn manager. I said, "Hey, Rob," I said, "You guys are always who wants to get on and try this?" Because 'Cause I'd been jumping cobblestone and they were in the background. And so
Uh-huh.
Rob says, "I'll do it," And this were a bunch of guys from South Dakota that had come down as a group, and they were wonderful guys. And
Yeah.
so Rob gets on cobblestone with his black cowboy hat and his toes turned out, and cobblestone didn't suffer fools at all. And, I took a clinic with Lockie Richards, and he set up the first jumps, so they were really low, a grid, and Cobblestone just plowed them down.
Oh, yeah.
And so he had no respect for little
Little
jumps
stuff.
at all. So
Right.
I put a 3-foot jump up for Rob, which was the minimum level that Cobblestone would jump, minimum.
Mhm.
And I say, "Okay, just canter him around and, go for it." And that horse jumped, like he was jumping the moon, and oh, shockingly, he was right at the end of the buckle. And, you know,
Oh, God.
and when he landed, it was not a pretty picture. Having said that, it got my point across. And he realized, and then all the cowboys realized how
It
hard
ain't easy.
it isn't easy, so,
Right.
and
Did he stay
they,
on?
wo-
After the
they,
jump, did he stay on?
he did, but not well,
Not pretty. Not
as I'm
pretty.
reliving this, it was not a pretty picture. He's a kind of a round guy,
Yeah.
and, it was
Yeah.
one of those looking like a bull rider coming out with
That's
catching a lot
hilarious.
he caught a lot of air. How's that,
That's
He was a
hilarious.
good rider, so he did stay on, but
Yeah.
it was the shock of his life. Shock of his life. So after that, it was pretty fun just to, do what I wanted to do with the
There. Yeah.
horses, but, I travel all over the Southwest, and, when we sold the ranch, we moved to San Ynez, and I had a terrific opportunity to meet Charlotte Bridall, and she's a dressage Olympian, and her horse, Monsieur, barn
Mhm.
named Moose. Charlotte and I met, and she was very picky about who she taught and who she let ride her horses, handle her horses. But we really hit it off, and I took a lesson from her one time on Monsieur, and she said 20-meter circle, and she said, "Okay, left lead and then flying lead change, but on the 20-meter circle." And Monsieur started doing one tempi changes on the 20-meter circle, and he wouldn't stop. And he's a big horse, by the way, and I'm very respectful, "Yo, you're an Olympic horse, you're an Olympic rider," so he wouldn't stop, and she just had a belly laugh, and she said, "He does that with everybody." Klaus Balkenhol also couldn't get him to stop, so
God.
I've had a lot of those fun memories. In San
Yeah.
Ynez, we met Monty and Pat Roberts
Mhm.
and his, barn manager, Crawford Hall, John Forsythe who had horses. So I was kind of got and observed, what Monty was doing is very controversial figure then.
Mhm.
Having said that, Crawford Hall was a consummate horseman. who taught me so much. He was quadriplegic. He kept
Mm.
everything in his head,
Wow.
and he was one of the most brilliant horsemen I've ever, come in contact with. He could just look and see. So pretty cool, pretty cool. So, over the years, a lot of those fun experiences. But for me, because of my passion for ethical horse training and horse management, that all those experiences were so much fun.
Mm.
But it always for me comes circles back around to the horses and the care of them and treating them right. And with the advent of social media, I have really mixed emotions about it
Mhm.
because there's so much a tsunami of information out there that it's difficult for new horse owners to separate and find what the truth is and what the let me sell you a carrot stick is.
Right.
And I see a tremendous amount of cruelty from some of the biggest names out there
Yeah.
because they don't know any better. The consumer, the client doesn't know any better. So in many ways, I find that very painful to
Mhm.
my heart that,
Right.
and so we just keep plugging away, plugging away, plugging away. A lot of times, that kind of notoriety comes down to a large advertising budget and willing to sell your soul. And neither Tim or I have ever been those people that would ever compromise a horse's well-being or the rider's well-being. Our friend John St. Ryan was very much like that as well, which is how we all kind of got together. We
Mhm.
brought John out here to Ocala to the Progressive Horsemen's Training Forum, which ran for about 3 years. And it was by invitation only, and so Tim and I were invited, we got to meet some of the best minds in the academic world and in the practical horse world as well. You know,
Mhm.
talking with Shauna about positive reinforcement. We met Sharon Madeir here in Ocala, who, sponsors a lot of these. So it was a fabulous opportunity, which led us to the International Society for Equitation Science and meeting Andrew McLean. So, this is a lifetime. This is I'm not going to use numbers, perhaps it's too telling, but this is a long time. This is well over 45 years now of gathering experiences. And this is why, I hope that here with the Nature of Natural and coming to Ocala and just meeting equestrians and just sitting and talking, I think is wonderful to
Mhm.
explain, what equitation science is, how we got here, the use for it in everyday horsemen, not just professional horsemen, but, backyard horse people. There's a huge segment of horse owners that need us, that need help, that need simple. We don't need all this falderall. We need horses 101, what's reasonable and what's, rational for a horse. And this is where a lot of the studies that coming out of ISES these days in colleges and universities, they prove what we knew then, classical masters knew, but also they're discovering really cool stuff like, what colors horses see best and, and facial expressions that indicate all kind of stuff that were always there. But we tend to, put our little blinders on and know what we know. When I was in California, one of the things that I noticed, and again, this is human behavior, is this need for our culture these days for instant gratification. Um, buy the Grand Prix horse, buy the clothes, buy the trainer, but they'll soon come right down to the level of that rider. I don't care how great your trainer is. It soon comes down here. So, there's an old cowboy song. I see by your outfit that you are a cowboy. I see by your outfit, you're a cowboy too. And then we see by our outfits that we are both cowboys. Get yourself an outfit. You can be a cowboy too. And so, you know, and now we transition that to dressage people, hunter jumper people.
Right.
There's so much money out there. There's starting to be, a separation of people who have
Haves
the
and
finances to show and buy
mhm,
and do. But again, for me, it comes back down to teaching people what's rational and giving them resources to go look and discern what is real, what wants to get into your pocketbook,
mhm.
and the background stories.
Right. Absolutely. And I have to say, I think we're at a crossroads right now because you're right, the internet, the whole social media, the positives and the negatives that come along with that, it makes all of this information available and it's at your fingertips. But until you have that hands-on experience and, you have to be able to tell who to
Yeah,
trust.
yeah, and it is that instant gratification business. There, that's not a path. The journey is the path. It's not the end destination. It's the learning and the hands-on, and I think the appreciation. One of the things about Charles de Comfy was, and if you've read any of his books, there's a deep, deep philosophy of what horses can train and teach humans that other humans can't teach you. It
Mhm.
teaches you bravery, courage, humility, discipline. He would go through this whole beautiful talk about that. And so I think today society we're indulge, but you can't buy your way into a horse's heart. You
Yeah.
can't do it. You've
Right.
got to really throw your soul into it. And for me, that is taking care of them and new concepts about management that, perhaps locking them in a stall, 23 out of 24 hours creates a lot of behavior issues that we have. So there's so much great information out there. This is, our last few chapters, hopefully reaching out to people and saying, we're here at the Nature of Natural. We are love to talk to people and help people. The website is up. We're here. We're only a phone call away for to help people. I'm seeing a huge problem with Mustangs these days being adopted,
Mhm.
and one after the other that they are I wanna place this Mustang because I've had it for 6 years and I still can't touch her. There's a huge thing going on there, and those horses end up in that pipeline to Mexico, you
That's
know?
exactly
So
right.
there's, this is, talk about being I am a big picture person, hopefully with a lot of, ideas under that umbrella. And
Yeah.
certainly working with Tim and, seeing, his abilities, I mean, it's quite extraordinary to see some of these poor, poor animals, horses that have come to him, um, and how he's been able to reach in there. My part of the equation is, though, reaching to the people
Yeah,
because
I
it's
would say that to me, your I mean, I know all of the horse side of it, but your experience back, 120 something horses and all that time of dealing with the people
the
who
people.
then have to
Yes,
deal
the
with the
people.
horses,
Yeah,
you've got a
yeah.
real strength there, so
Yeah, and that's why, Tim and I have always had a really great working, formula,
mhm,
because of that thing right there,
yeah,
so
yeah. Well, I'm
Anyway,
excited to hear we'll bring him on the call in just a minute. I'm excited to hear about your plans for moving forward, but I do have one more question before we do that. Of all the horses, I know you mentioned Cobblestone, your fancy event horse, but of all of the horses that came through that ranch, were there certain ones that just spoke to your heart, or was
well,
there a type that
probably
you
at least a dozen that were
I
my,
was gonna say?
there's an old saying, "You're lucky if you have one good horse in a lifetime." I don't believe that anymore. I had so many wonderful horses, and you know why? Because I thought I did, and I loved them, and I believed in them, and I didn't need a cobblestone, and I have to say probably the best horse I ever had was a cavalry remount horse named Pinto Bean. You may call him Mr. Bean. He was just a he was just a tick under 18 hands, and he came to me for the couple who went to work for me, and they fell upon hard times. And that horse had been a family member, and I got him when he was 18 years old, and he could do hunters, he could do jumpers. You could put a baby on him. You could rope head and heel off of him. You could pack elk out on this horse. And at the height of his career, he jumped 5'7" at the Colorado State Fair with a 14-year-old kid on his back.
Ugh,
He was probably, and he was an old soul. He was an old soul. That horse taught me so much. Cobblestone did too, but in a different way.
right.
He was half Arabian, half thoroughbred, and difficult, and exquisitely trained, and read me like a computer printout. Said, "Oh, she's green." Now, sadly for me, he and Charles DeComfy had a lovely relationship, and I'm riding this horse out in Santa Fe, New Mexico, at a 3-day eventing clinic with Charles, and there's a train going by, and this horse he was, shortlisted for the Olympics. This horse, he was uncontrollable, and so I go get through this, and I'm like, "Oh my god," Charles walks up to me and he says, "May I ride your horse?" And I said, "Take him, he's yours." He gets on, he sits up, gathers the reins, and he canters around this cross-country course that I had just been on like a runaway freight train on, like it was a hunter class. And he canters and he comes back to me, he stops, he hops off, hands me the reins, and thanks me. "Thank you very much for allowing me the privilege of riding your horse." And then, eyeballs are rolling in my head, and he says, Ginny, I haven't jumped in 14 years." That was a horseman.
Wow,
That was
definitely.
a horseman, yeah.
That's so funny. Mm.
Yeah, Charles and I had a lot of funny, and his voice when he was quite upset with me would go, "Ginny." He was, I was at another clinic with him and, having a private lesson with the headset on, with the little antenna, which came loose and it's going back and forth like Tinkerbell.
Mm.
And Charles is just the horse was impossible, again, because he knows Charles is right there. The
Yeah.
wind is blowing, and he's just, like, having the time of his life, the horse is. And again, Charles is saying some things I can't repeat here about what's going on. He's, duh, 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 duh," and then finally he gets up, walks out. "May I ride your horse, please?" And he gets on, and again, those 2 were just magic together.
Correct.
And he
Yeah.
just does this beautiful, like, almost like show ring performance. And he comes back, he doesn't say anything to me this time. I get on, and Cobblestone felt like he was full of helium. That's how
Oh,
light he was. So,
that's lovely.
lot of little stories under the big
Yeah.
picture,
I
but
think
here
that's the
we
thing.
are now in beautiful Ocala. I'm just loving it so far. I've met some lovely people. We're gonna have a little barbecue here to meet, our neighbors and some horse people here, and
Uh-huh.
that's about it.
I think you're gonna love being there. There's such a wonderful community of horse people in Ocala, so I know you're gonna love it. So let's bring Tim in and hear a little bit more about his thoughts on the move. Is he available?
Tim?
There he is.
All right, how are you 2? Oh,
We're
nice,
good. What you
nice
been
morning.
doing?
I've been
Yeah,
listening to Ginny's story, and
yeah.
that's it. Just
You're both such good storytellers. I've loved
yeah,
learning a little bit more about both of you and the background and the special horses in your life, from Dusty to Cobblestone and all the many horses in between. So,
yeah,
Jim, what are your next steps? Since we spoke the other day, how are things going? Are you getting a little bit more settled in?
yeah. We are. We're almost done setting up for everything. And the next plan, of course, Ginny brought it up during her talk, is we've moved the center of the Nature and Natural to Ocala for the reasons she alluded to, the huge amount of horse people here, and probably we feel a greater willingness to be educated in terms of these principles. And Jenny spoke of the importance of educating people so that those people could then help their horses. So, in that light, I'm going to start a school of equitation science. Equitation science is based on behavioral science. It's specific to horses, as any species has its own sort of set of innate settings that affect how they operate and survive. And so behavioral science is a lot of principles of nature, essentially, that evolve through nature and how things learn. And we're going to have use all the 10 training principles that were studied and put forward by many researchers. Many, if not all, were part of Society for Equitation Science, and Andrew McLean was probably one of the head person. He'll be at times a consultant. We've already consulted with him. And our school will be a little unique. There's really, I don't know that universities teach behavioral science, different ones, but we're going to focus on bringing those principles through the eyes of past Sata masters, why things work. Um, and in that process, I think if we look at the things we've learned about horses on a deeper level, then, we knew quite a lot, I think, but there are nuances to understanding the horse that are deeper than a lot of people would give them credit
Mhm.
for, right? And through that understanding and the principles that we will teach, we hope to educate people so that they can make better choices in their training, choices in their care. And, excuse me, both of you mentioned, social media and all these things that pop up, this trainer and that. And once you sort of get going on this and you'll understand those principles, you'll be able to evaluate people far better. And, maybe you walk in and go, this guy's really not for me, as opposed as opposed to going, oh yeah, he says try this, and you go home and you start whatever you start, right?
Yeah.
Uh, And in what we're going to teach is pretty, I mean, the methods and things we use, you know all the methods. It's
Mhm.
just when and how you apply them and in what situation. And so
Right.
one of the very biggest things will be the one principle. Number 4 is a high regard for emotional states. And in that case, we will have and equate it to, in our case, this for now, it's not Charles, but Tom Dorrance. And his principle was working from the inside out. So those recognitions of very nuanced, the beginning of arousal, um, which is, happens long sometimes. I mean, everybody knows eye head and rolled eyes and tight back. But when you get that far along the way, uh, certainly you want to do something about it, but recognizing on a deeper level that as you go along, and then choosing some uh, appropriate method to kind of work on that emotion, right? To figure out why they're having it, if you can, from the environment or their perception of things. And we'll be using combined reinforcement,
Mhm.
which is the combination of both pressure negative reinforcement and positive reinforcement, and also social interaction with the rubbing and such. So those things will be combined together in different processes to just get some simple results. And then that once the horse can get to, um, a more sort of stable state, its ability to think, be cognitive, is at its greatest degree. And that's really what we're trying to get, to think through these problems for the horse. The horse thinks through the problems, as opposed to being controlled by, say, the environment or some innate setting that the horse has.
Mhm.
So we'll be starting that school soon. I probably, given the holidays are coming up and such, probably looking at the first of the year. But that's what we'll be doing down here, and we could set up pretty quick for in-house problem solving here at this place. But of course, that would be limited really to if you lived in the area, which
Mhm.
is fine. Come on by, and that's a good way to teach it. At least start out and get people's interest. They have always some issue. Uh, most, we all do. Like you get along, and so we'll probably be doing that soon. As soon as we finish all the little infrastructure and things that need to be put into place. So that's our story. We're here in Ocala. Uh, Jenny's here for at least the winter. Maybe we can talk her into longer. I don't know, but uh, I'm here. So come on by,
Yeah.
or check the website, give us a call, whatever you want to do. We'll try to respond to you in a timely and thoughtful way.
Right, right. Well, like you said, the website has so much information on it. But now also to me, your social media, the Facebook page, your Jenny's putting a lot of stuff up about different things. And so I'm sure you'll be letting people know when things are happening through that as well.
Right.
And so they really can just call you on the phone anytime.
They can call me on the phone.
There you go. There you go. Well, it's funny when we first started talking back in May, April, May, or whatever, this was all like a dream that, you're going to be going to Ocala, you're going to be moving. And so to have followed that whole journey and to see you there now and looking so happy and sounding so happy, I think that's a big step. So I'm excited for y'all, but I'm also excited for the people who now will have that opportunity to learn from you because all of these conversations we've talked so much about, the Tom Dorrances and the Charles DeComfies and John St. Ryan and everybody else. And it's been wonderful to hear all of that background. But to me, too, the most important thing is that now everybody has this wealth of information from the two of you and your team. And we better all start, picking up that phone or making those appointments to come in and see what it's all about in person. So I'm happy for all of us.
Thank you.
Well, I look forward to the next time. So y'all take care.
Bye.